A couple whose baby daughter suffocated during her first breastfeed are suing the NHS for millions, claiming they were let down by a midwife. Julia Geiss-Clements, 39, and her financier husband, Lee Clements, 41, from Denham in Buckinghamshire, say a midwife gave inadequate advice on how to breastfeed their daughter, Cerise. They claim she would have escaped a lifetime of disability had the midwife warned them to keep her airway clearer as she was held against her mother's breast. Cerise collapsed less than half an hour after she was born at Queen Charlotte's in Chelsea Hospital in 2012, the High Court heard. Although Mrs. Geiss-Clements had attended antenatal classes, Cerise was her first baby, and the exhausted mother had no experience of feeding an infant. She requires 24-hour care due to the need for constant monitoring and regular suction of her airways. Mrs. Geiss-Clements, a marketing manager, is now suing Imperial College Healthcare NHS Trust on Cerise's behalf, alleging the midwife gave negligent advice. Due to the severity of her injuries, Cerise's claim is of maximum value, and she will win millions to pay for her care if Mrs. Justice May rules against the NHS. The couple claim the midwife should, as promised, have returned to check on Cerise 10 minutes into the feed. The couple's QC told the court that during the feed Mrs. Geiss-Clements felt Cerise lose contact with the breast. She guided her baby back into position, but soon afterwards, Cerise seemed to doze off, he added. He said she did not want to disturb Cerise as she thought that she was sleeping, but became alarmed when she noticed her turning pale and floppy. 25 minutes into the feed, her husband rushed off to find the midwife, but when she returned she could feel no pulse on Cerise. Mr. Moon added, in fact Cerise had suffered an episode of hypoxia which had caused her severe brain damage. Cerise was delivered in the hospital's birthing pool, but received emergency first aid immediately afterwards to help her breathe spontaneously, the court heard. She was then handed to Mrs. Geiss-Clements for her first taste of mother's milk. Although the infant seemed to be latched on, Mrs. Geiss-Clements said she felt uncomfortable as she could not see her face. She told the court, I instinctively felt that she might be too close up to my breast. This concern led me to check with the midwife that Cerise would be able to breathe while positioned like that. Share this article. Share the midwife said that a baby would wriggle and pull their head back if they could not breathe properly during breastfeeding. Other than answering my query about whether Cerise could breathe, I remember that the midwife did not give me any advice about breastfeeding. The midwife claims she advised Cerise's mother that she should support the infant's back and neck during feeding, but not to hold her too tightly and not to hold the back of her head. She had no recollection of Mrs. Geiss-Clements specifically asking her about the possibility of her baby not being able to breathe during feeding, said John Whitting QC, for the NHS Trust. He said she would have explained the risks of holding the back of a baby's head during feeding, and that a child will not suffocate on the breast so long as it can move its head back. Mrs. Geiss-Clements, he added, had been an assiduous attender at pre-birth NCT classes, at which safe breastfeeding practice would have been covered in some detail. The cause of Cerise's oxygen starvation was probably a random postnatal sudden collapse which could not have been foreseen, and in which negligence played no part, he told the court. The trial continues.